Transform your Christian school culture through the Flourishing Journey with Dr. Edward Bunn, ACSI Professional Development Director.
Welcome to the Flourishing Journey podcast. I'm Dr. Edward Bunn, and I will serve as your travel guide throughout this podcast series. We'll explore strategies and principles for building a school culture that truly thrives. Each month, we'll take a brief pit stop centering around a relevant, flourishing construct as together we journey into the world of ideas, research, and practice. Well, hello, flourishing practitioners. Welcome to the first of 3 episodes around the flourishing domain of well-being. A recent study by the Journal of School Leadership found that more than 96% of principals claim to have experienced work-related stress at a level, get this, that they believe was affecting their mental and physical health, their work habits, and even their productivity. So today, during our series on well-being, we will discuss the contributing factors to these stats and practical ways to help school leaders stay on a path of well-being. And for this segment, we have special guest and a very good friend, Mia Imbro. Mia is a licensed professional counselor for over 25 years, a certified parent educator who facilitates healthy conversations regarding the topics of relational health, mental and emotional wellness, diversity, faith, awareness, and self-improvement. She's also a published author and has recently written A Sticky Story. I would encourage everybody to get this. I've read this to my own children. A children's book about navigating emotions and feelings when hard things happen. In response to a world that has brought anxiety and grief to the forefront, this book was created as a tool to evoke life-giving conversations with a young audience. Well, Mia, I just want to welcome you to the podcast today. So great to have you.
Oh, it's my joy to be here. Thank you to you and to the viewers. It's my privilege to be here today, Edward.
Well, listen, I'm ready to jump in because this is just a topic that will not go away. Right after COVID, so many schools, so many educators asking many questions about their personal well-being, the well-being of students, the well-being of families. Help, we're stressed out, right? And so this first question kind of gets to that because it's still relevant. It's not going away. So why are we, Mia, seeing an increase in stress among both educators and students?
I mean, of course, I will say some of it is so very personal and individualized according to what's going on in an individual's life, health concerns, just lifing, as people say, and just the things that you can't see, we say exist below the waterline that impact a person, just their own dissonance emotionally and spiritually, physically, psychologically. But if I were to be general, I would say that oftentimes we as educators and leaders mirror whatever is going on in our world. And so it's like being in a smoker's environment. Whatever is in the atmosphere is what's on you, and that's what causes it to be on you. And because we are moving at such a quick rate at all times now, we're just getting fragments of choices and voices, and everyone's kind of telling us who we are and who to be and what to do. And I will say for the human mind and brain and how we are created, that is very overwhelming, and it's very stressful because it creates this fragmented dissonance. It's like unsure footing. And so you have all of these options, but you're not even sure of who you are. And that is very stressful to the body, soul, and mind because it makes us have a lack of focus. And so if you were to ask me after doing this for this many years with educators and leaders, it's because there are so many options, a multitude of choices and voices, but no clear voice and path seems to be overriding the rest of them.
Oh, I love that, not having that clear path, or maybe not being able to identify currently what that clear path is. But, you mentioned something else that really stood out to me, and that's kind of what's under the waterline. That really resonated with my own heart because I know personally as a leader, what I present to people versus what's really happening in this internal space, right? And I think sometimes we don't allow for that which is happening in the internal space to actually bubble up and come out and help us create that clear path that you talked about. So it's so valuable. I love the language that you're using here. And it kind of, question number one in your response it was so gifted. Kind of gets us at question number two I wanted to ask. So, what are some of the common stressors that school leaders and teachers face in their particular role? So we're thinking school leader, school teacher, the roles in which they live day in and day out. What are some of those common stressors that you're seeing?
It is exactly what you just mentioned. It is common stressors more than not are expectations and the perceived inability to meet those expectations in a manner that we feel is well done. A lack of resources, a lack of leadership, a lack of time, a lack of capacity, lack of goodness of fit. So I would say for educators and leaders, it's that you have these expectations that are identified and spoken or self-imposed, but somehow there's a gap between what you want to achieve and the resources or the ability to do so, and then the perceived repercussions of not being able to do that. And then, as we said before, just knowing that we are not just one thing, there's all these other things going on in our life because God created us in his wholeness. If you have family stressors or if there's health conditions or traumas or concerns, it's all kind of enmeshed together. And it makes it very difficult. But I would say that it's a matter of a lack of time, a lack of resources, a lack of understanding what the perceived expectation is the most stressful variable for educators.
That's good. So, when I think about something you said, it made me think of, well, like all the things, the voices, the choices. It almost, for me in my brain, I was thinking how things can build and build and build. And if we're
Absolutely.
not doing something as those things build, like, my mother is dealing with cancer, and on
Yes.
top of my wayward son making bad
Yes.
decisions, on top of me having to lead a school that's very challenging. So
Yes.
can you speak to that a little bit as it's building? How do we have those healthy release points?
I think we have to know that we cannot be all things to all people. And that's why we worship a God and serve a God that is that. And you have to kind of put your worries at his feet, which is very difficult for us to do because you can Google anything, right? How to fix anything. And so we feel like we have this false sense of that we should be able to solve and do and handle. And we forget that we serve a God and we serve Jesus who himself took time for solitude and to step away and to delegate and say, I'll be there in a minute, but yet at the same time yielding compassion. And we oftentimes think of that compassion externally being towards others, but we forget to give that to ourselves. And sometimes we're trying to solve all the train wrecks that are around us externally, and we forget about the train wreck that we are internally. And so I would say it's about boundaries and limits and being able to communicate clearly, being able to be transparent and saying and confession and being able to admit where we're struggling and what feels hard and our inability without feeling shame or resentment behind that, but feeling grace and understanding. I think that that is the sweet balance that we seek.
Yeah, I like that too. And I love, the use of balance there, especially in response to, not feeling shame when we admit, there's still, I think we're getting better in society and in culture by talking about mental health issues and mental health challenges. I don't think we've arrived by any means. But to hear you say, and to hear others that are professionals and experts in this lane say, hey, you know what? Um, we do have broken places, and it's okay to talk about those broken aspects of our lives in healthy ways, and to really lay those broken pieces at the feet of Jesus.
Absolutely. He
First.
invites us to do so, right? He says, come. So it's not I think sometimes the shame is that we think we should not struggle. We should not have hard and broken places. And he's already acknowledged, like, come unto me, all these that are heavy burdened and heavy laden. He knew and he knows that that's going to happen. But I think it's where we place it. And the frustration becomes when we place it in inappropriate places versus at his feet.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, my next question number three, is I want to take a little bit of a turn, but it's still tied to stress. And so I want to talk about technology just for a moment. I'm reading a great book that somebody recommended to me, The Anxious Generation, and it kind of gets at that a little bit. But how, in your opinion, has the advent and the increasing use of technology, both as a form of communication, also maybe even an educational tool, impacted stress levels for educators and even students? Now, we all know that things can be used as tools, both good but bad, but there's more and more research coming out that says, the increasing use of technology is actually increasing both anxiety and depression. For our talk today, it's increasing levels of stress in people. Can you
It's
speak?
so, yeah, it's so interesting, right? Because in the visual line, it's an advancement and it gives us quicker access to tools, as you said, that helps us learn. But what's interesting about that, and you've probably heard me say this before, Edward, is that God keeps creating us the same in his image. And so it's the insatiable quest. It's like drinking out of a fire hydrant to keep up with the ever changing, ever progressing nature of technology, but not taking into consideration the human condition and how we are created and our rhythm and how we best produce and how we best feel whole and healthy. That's not taken into consideration. So think about that. I don't want to date myself. And I used to think this is how you know when you're older is when you start quoting things that happened back in the day. But I do remember when I was a child, there was a time that the television went off, right? There were maybe, I don't know, maybe 10 channels. I can't even remember. But then there was a time when static came on and the flag, and then that was it. There was no more access to it. So there was a boundary and there was a limit and there was a symbol that now it's time for that to end and you need to go rest. Well, think about today. You can be on a device 24/7 and then you have access of information and the brain has no time to rest. And a weary brain is stressed. I just will say that it hasn't changed. The brain has not advanced in any way. And so I believe it's just the constant, insatiable intake of information via technology, which does things great. But with that, I think the concern is that then that decreases human connection, and we were made for human connection. And there are things about human connection that technology, whether it be AI or whatever it is, will never be able to perfect. It will get similar and it will give a sense that it is, but it will not evoke the same emotion and response that we need and the same indicators about the rhythm of how we move through relationship. And so technology is good, but I do think all the research has not been completed and we're going to find out that we probably did more harm than good.
Yes, that's a great response and a lot of truths there that we need to lean into. I'm with you. I don't want to date myself either, but every night we had dinner together as a family, and this is when you had the old phones, not the not these phones. And my parents took the phone off the hook and laid it down so nobody could call in and interrupt our family meal and our family conversation together. In other words, we're turning things off in
Yes.
order for the human connection to take place. And
Yes.
I love how you talk about, the human factor and the God factor here. The human factor, we are created in the image of God. So the God factor, we're created by Him. So how are we created? When you kind of get at that, our brain needs rest. We need
Yes.
each other. We need to interact with one another, not just in the digital or virtual space, but we need to do life with one another. And God's called us to that. Yes, let's lean on the tools, but let's also lean into how we were created and why we were created. So I love that. Well, I got just one final question. It probably won't take too long for you to answer, but I love to throw questions out like this to you because you're just so gifted with what God's called you to. We learn so much when you speak and just have conversation with us, Mia. But just in closing, what advice would you give to teachers and school leaders about dealing with increasing levels of stress? Well, if you were just to look right in that camera and say, "Hey, this is some advice I'd give you today about how your stress has been increasing," what would you offer us?
That's such a challenging question. I know you know this, Edward, because there's always the higher up demand of expectations, and especially in private school world where people are paying money for their children to go. There's a certain return that we are seeking. But for leaders, for me, having done this so long and having loved God for so long, is I would just say to be intentional about our choices and where we spend our time and our efforts and what the expectation is and the motive of that expectation. Is it to bring glory to God? Is it so that we are creating people that when you watch them in their work and what they do, you see the evidence of God? Or are we just creating this whole stressed out narrative of people who feel disjointed and fragmented? And so I would say to be intentional, to be aware of choices that you make for your schools and for yourself, to be aware of yourself, your moods, how you feel in your well-being. We talk about the facets of well-being: social, emotional, psychological, spiritual, and plugged in. Do you feel fed? Are you spending time with God? Are you able to reflect, not just to take in the word and regurgitate the word, but for application and reflection, and to sit on that? So for spaces to create time for that. And then I would just say rest. And I know that sounds so cliche, but people do not rest well anymore. And it's not even physical sleep. It's just unplugging for your mind, getting off the devices, getting into nature, putting your feet in water, putting your feet on grass, listening to music, still understanding what the importance of play and movement in your body. And then for your soul, just this intentional time with God. That's not a 5-minute devotional. That's giving time for that call and response of him to hear his voice. And because there are so many voices in our life, you really have to fight hard for that in this day and age. And so for educators and leaders, creating environments and spaces that encourage that and that give time for that to happen in whatever unique way that looks like within that school.
Oh, that's great, Mia. I think I heard you say it's okay for us to say no. It's okay for us to say not now. It's okay for us to rest. It's okay for us to take that which somebody else makes urgent, and we don't have to make that urgent. So that's what I'm hearing.
That's so good. It's so good, Edward. And we served, and Jesus did that, right? He modeled that, and it's okay because it's an insatiable quest. If you don't choose that, people are always tweaking. I mean, if you have any access to social media, that's all we do is tweak each other and have opinions without context and without a relationship. And that's a very, very dangerous thing. Yes, for mental health, spiritual health, emotional health. So that is exactly what I was saying, Edward.
Awesome, awesome. Well, it's always a joy to speak with you, Mia, in any kind of form of conversation. Look forward to seeing you soon this fall at FSI Houston. The end of October, we'll be together as you keynote and share a breakout session with us around some of these familiar topics as well. But I just want to say thank you today. Thank you for journeying with us around the flourishing construct of well-being and sharing your ideas, some research, and some strategies for us. So a big thanks to you, Mia.
Always my honor. Thank you, Edward.
Well, I'd like to say join us next time on the Flourishing Journey podcast for episode 2 in this new series as we focus on resources that will help you on your path to well-being.
The Flourishing Journey is a presentation of the Association of Christian Schools International. Foster a flourishing school culture by visiting acsi.org/flourishing.